She didn't even lift her eyes as she flung the identification card onto the hard floor. Behind the sterile, bulletproof glass, beneath the unforgiving glare of fluorescent bulbs, a flawlessly dressed bank employee dismissed a black woman's identity, documents like worthless scraps. Then, without a word or glance, she turned her back, as though the woman herself had vanished entirely. No justification, no apology, only the dry, hollow sound of plastic meeting Thailand, the suffocating quiet of unseen stares, silently judging, quietly condemning. Nobody spoke. No one stepped in. And within that stillness, something subtle yet powerful began to fracture. Not within these towering walls, but deep inside the woman standing alone, holding tight to her quiet, dignified composure, she stood. Motionless, controlled, a figure they never truly saw yet, eagerly dismissed. Her clothes were standard business attire, her shoes scuffed with wear, and her deep brown skin, unbowed and unapologetic, made her simultaneously visible and overlooked to those nearby. What unfolded next didn't make the news. It wasn't front page material, but it carried a sharper, quieter blow. Damaged dignity and diminished worth. Natalie Coleman pushed through the tall glass doors of Stratton Financial Bank in downtown Raleigh on a suffocatingly hot afternoon. Harsh sunlight poured through the massive windows, flooding the shining marble floors with blinding reflections. Inside, the air was crisp and flawless, a soft piano melody drifting through the space, soothing the wealthy clients. Natalie paused by the entrance, smoothing the lapel of her modest navy blazer and tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Her appearance, though understated, was perfectly neat enough to project quiet professionalism. Drawing in a steady breath, she made her way toward the teller counters, where a young woman with carefully styled blonde curls, dressed in a pristine white blouse with a badge reading Jessica, sat glued to her computer screen. Natalie waited calmly, eyes on Jessica, hoping for acknowledgement. 1 second passed, then another. Then an uncomfortable, dragging stretch of silence. Jessica didn't look up though Natalie wasn't there. "Hello," Natalie offered gently, breaking the tense silence, but the only reply was cold disregard. Jessica kept typing. At that moment, a white man in an impeccable gray suit entered, and Jessica's expression instantly brightened. She beamed at him, standing swiftly with cheerful energy. Natalie's chest tightened, but she held steady. When Jessica eventually returned her attention to the screen, Natalie repeated calmly, "Excuse me, I'd like to make a deposit and check my account, please." Jessica's face wrinkled in irritation, her words clipped. "Do you have an appointment?" "We only handle transactions with prior scheduling," she stated icily. Natalie swallowed her frustration, keeping her tone even. She explained she wasn't here for financial consultation. She simply needed to deposit a check into her existing account. Jessica let out an exasperated sigh and pointed toward the teller lines without speaking. Natalie nodded politely and made her way to the area indicated. When her turn came, she carefully placed her identification and certified check on the counter. Jessica approached, eyes narrowing with suspicion. She held the ID at the edges like it was contaminated, inspected it briefly, then flung it to the cold stone floor with a sharp, metallic clatter. The room fell still. Conversation stopped. The ID lay abandoned, stripped of value under silent scrutiny. Fury swelled in Natalie's chest, but she controlled it. Slowly, with steady grace, she stooped to retrieve the card, her gaze locking onto Jessica's with quiet defiance and poise. Jessica's face stayed frozen, devoid of regret, untouched by shame, and in that weighted hush. Natalie understood she was caught in a quiet confrontation, not just for herself, but against the prejudices rooted in this space, the very place where basic respect should have been unquestioned. Straightening ID firm in her hand, Natalie noticed how quickly the room's atmosphere returned to a disturbing normal, as if the humiliation hadn't happened at all. She inhaled deeply, smoothed her blazer's lapel, and stepped back, waiting for further direction. Fighting the rush of emotion in her chest, Ashley, the front desk receptionist, sat at the sleek counter near the lobby's left wall. Her perfectly curled red hair and chic gold-rimmed glasses gave her the air of quiet, authority reserved for those with silent privilege. Natalie approached, still hoping for clarity, for some basic courtesy or instruction. But Ashley remained engrossed in her computer, her pastel pink nails tapping briskly across the keys. Natalie stood patiently. 1 minute, then 2, each tick of the clock reinforcing the same silent message. Her presence here was meaningless. "Excuse me," Natalie spoke, voice steady. "Could you tell me?" Before she could finish, Ashley lifted her left hand, palm outward, signaling silence without ever glancing up. That simple, dismissive gesture said everything. "You don't matter here." A chill crept along Natalie's spine. For a fleeting second, she wondered if this was some misunderstanding until the doors opened, and in walked a well-dressed white couple. Instantly, Ashley's frosty demeanor melted into a beaming smile. "Good afternoon, Mr. and Mrs. Pfizer," Ashley greeted, rising gracefully. "It's always such a pleasure to have you with us." "We have a 2 o'clock appointment," the man replied politely. "Perfect timing, sir. We're thrilled you're here," Ashley chimed, handing them VIP cards. "Please make your way to the VIP lounge. You'll have someone bring tea immediately." Watching the exchange, Natalie's chest tightened further. The contrast was undeniable. She looked down at her simple leather shoes, her unremarkable office wear. Nothing about her warranted this treatment. And yet, in Ashley's eyes and in the eyes of others, clearly wasn't enough. Another young woman in sleek corporate attire approached the desk next. Ashley pivoted instantly, her tone sugary sweet. "Hello, ma'am. How can I help you today?" Natalie stood there, unseen. She caught glimpses of other staff peering her way, then quickly averting their eyes, choosing silence over involvement.
Elf.
It wasn't a mistake, it was silent complicity. Jessica's coldness, Ashley's disdain, they weren't isolated. They were symptoms of the same quiet system that marginalized, doubted, and sidelined people like Natalie. Ashley cast one last fleeting glance toward Natalie, a faint, taunting smirk. "You don't belong here." The simmering ache of indignation burned in Natalie's chest. But she refused to let her poise crack. She wouldn't hand them that victory. Standing tall, her expression unwavering, Natalie vowed not to leave until her dignity and her rights were recognized. She understood the fight wouldn't be easy, but she wasn't just standing for herself. She was standing for everyone who had ever been dismissed, overlooked, or demeaned in quiet. Cruel ways. Holding her composure tightly, Natalie returned to the teller station, determined that following the proper steps would end this ordeal. The space was noticeably quieter. Natalie's gaze found Jessica, the same teller who had humiliated her earlier. Jessica glanced up, her expression still sharp and unwelcoming, as if Natalie's presence remained an inconvenience. Natalie placed the certified check on the counter, her voice composed, steady. "Here's the certified check from my partner. I'd like to deposit it into the business account." Jessica didn't rush. She leaned forward, studying the check beneath the harsh fluorescent glare, her eyes narrowing with doubt as though Natalie were presenting something illicit. Masking her suspicion poorly, Jessica unleashed a stream of irrelevant questions. "What's the name of your company? How long have you been running it?" Natalie answered every question patiently. Jessica's tone dripped with sarcasm. "Where's your headquarters? Do you have the original registration? Oh, and why choose our bank?" None of it followed standard procedure. It existed purely to delay, discourage, and demean. Jessica's eyes moved slowly from Natalie's plain shoes to her unbranded blazer, then to her simple hairstyle and the modest purse she held. Every glance radiated disdain. Finally, Jessica unwillingly picked up the check, pinching it between her thumb and forefinger, as though it was filthy, held it beneath the light, and curved her lips into a mocking half-smile. "Are you certain this is real?" she asked with a sneer. "It doesn't look reliable in the slightest. I've seen plenty of people try to pass off fake checks exactly like this one." Natalie clenched her jaw, forcing herself to suppress the frustration. Boiling within her, she answered steadily, "This is a certified check issued by a reputable bank. You can easily verify it in your system." Jessica didn't respond directly. Instead, she leaned toward her colleague Rachel, who had been observing the entire exchange with detached amusement, and whispered just loud enough for Natalie to hear, "What do you think of this check?" Looks exactly like the type of fake paperwork they bring in here. Rachel shot Natalie a brief glance, her mouth twitching with agreement. Yeah, these days you can never be too careful. It's easy to get tricked, she added, smirking. Their muffled giggles, though soft, were loud enough to draw attention.
Oh.
Nearby customers cast inquisitive glances toward Natalie. A few whispered among themselves before turning away, but Natalie knew the damage had been done. She was already branded suspicious. She felt like she was standing, exposed in a hostile arena, every eye dissecting her appearance and actions, yet she refused to retreat. She was innocent and she knew it, meeting Jessica's gaze without flinching. Natalie replied with quiet but resolute strength, I insist you verify this information thoroughly. This is a perfectly legitimate transaction, and I will not tolerate this disrespect. Jessica blinked, briefly caught off guard by Natalie's unwavering tone, but quickly returned to her usual icy expression. With an unwilling nod, she turned back to her computer, beginning the verification process slowly and with exaggerated reluctance. In the tense silence that followed, Natalie grasped that this wasn't simply a personal clash with Jessica or Rachel. It was a symptom of a deeply rooted, unspoken culture of prejudice, safeguarded by the silent approval of those nearby. She was facing a closed system infused with bias, and she knew she'd need to fight hard to earn the respect and fair treatment that should have been hers by right. Standing her ground, her eyes never leaving Jessica, Natalie braced for what was to come. She understood this was merely the beginning of a difficult struggle, but she was ready to win it. As Jessica deliberately dragged her feet through the verification process, Natalie noticed a middle-aged man in a dark gray suit emerging from the back office, his expression irritated as though disturbed from a break. His name tag read, Thomas Kent, branch manager. Natalie silently hoped he'd resolve this situation quickly. Mr. Kent walked over, his eyes briefly scanning Natalie with cool detachment before settling on Jessica with a questioning look.
What's happening here, Jessica? Is there a problem?
Instantly, Jessica's voice softened, adopting an unexpectedly polite tone that stood in stark contrast to how she'd treated Natalie moments before. Mr. Kent, this customer is trying to deposit a rather large check, but I noticed a few red flags and the accompanying paperwork isn't entirely clear. I thought I should get your opinion. Mr. Kent sighed with impatience, took the check from Jessica's outstretched hand, glanced over it for a few moments, then delivered his decision in a short, firm voice. I'm sorry, but based on what we've received, we cannot process this transaction. There's insufficient proof to verify its authenticity. Each word cut through Natalie's pride like a sharp blade. She responded immediately, her voice calm but assertive. Sir, I've provided every document your bank requires for this process. I truly don't understand how a clearly certified check can't be verified. Mr. Kent raised an eyebrow, visibly displeased by her challenge. He eyed her from head to toe, his gaze dripping with undisguised scorn. The issue is, we must ensure that transactions are conducted by qualified clients. You haven't proven that. Perhaps you'd be better off at another bank, one more suited to your ... needs. With that, he turned away, striding back to his office, leaving Natalie no chance to respond. The sharp clicks of his leather shoes on the marble floor underscored the finality of his decision. A suffocating silence descended over the lobby. Natalie could feel dozens of eyes on her. Jessica, still stationed behind the teller counter, seized the moment to twist the knife. She lifted her chin with smug arrogance and spoke just loud enough for the nearby customers to hear. You see, the issue isn't only the paperwork.
Precisely.
Judging by your outfit, your shoes, that pursuit don't exactly fit the profile of someone we expect to do business here. Soft, stifled laughter rippled around Natalie. A young white woman covered her mouth, her eyes sparkling with quiet amusement. A man nodded toward Jessica, smirking in agreement. The entire bank had become a stage for Natalie's public humiliation. Wave of embarrassment washed over her, sharp and searing. Every snide glance, every whispered laugh felt like a dagger to her pride. But still, she stood firm. Her posture was tall, her gaze unshaken, though her heart ached under the cruelty. Jessica's triumphant smirk betrayed her satisfaction at Natalie's silence. She leaned toward Rachel, who had been observing with cold amusement, and whispered something that made both of them chuckle softly. They basked in the cruel pleasure of tearing someone down in public. With controlled, deliberate movements, Natalie gathered her check and documents. Her hands quivered slightly, but her resolve never faltered. She recognized this wasn't simply about personal offense anymore. It was a fight for the basic dignity every person deserves. Before turning to leave, Natalie locked eyes with Jessica, her voice steady and low, but carrying undeniable weight. Remember what you said today. Time will come when you'll have to answer for those words. And when that day arrives, I promise, it won't be me who feels ashamed. With that, she turned and walked toward the exit without looking back. The whispered remarks behind her continued, but they no longer held any power over her. As the glass doors swung open and sunlight poured into the lobby, Natalie felt only the cold sting of the prejudice she'd just faced. Stepping outside, she knew she'd just endured a brutal humiliation. But she also knew she'd return in next time. She wouldn't remain quiet. The sunlight outside wasn't warm enough to thaw the chill in her chest. The click of the glass doors behind her felt like the punctuation mark on her patience. But in that bitter moment, Natalie understood something crucial. Silence and quiet acceptance in the face of discrimination could never be her answer. Back at her office, she shut the door firmly behind her, settling into the familiar comfort of her leather chair. On the desk sat a neatly organized file, the $2.3 billion contract her company, Coleman Construction, had recently secured with Stratton Financial itself. Her eyes drifted down to the signature line. Natalie Coleman, Chief Executive Officer. She knew exactly where her true worth lay, and she would never again allow anyone to treat her with the contempt she'd just faced. That night, sleep eluded Natalie. She spent the early hours at her desk, assembling every document, signed contracts, company profiles, even a direct confirmation letter from Stratton Financial's board of directors. Each crisp page reaffirmed the undeniable truth. She was the CEO of a major construction firm and a strategic partner to the very bank that had disrespected her. She knew her return wouldn't be a request, it would be a demand for the respect and justice she had earned. The following morning, Natalie walked confidently into Stratton Financial. Her tailored black suit, polished heels, and sleek updo declared executive authority without a single word as she strode inside. Those who had mocked her yesterday stole curious, surprised glances in her direction. Ignoring their stares, she walked directly to the reception desk, where Ashley sat. Ashley looked up, momentarily startled, but quickly masked it with professional indifference. This time, Natalie didn't wait to be dismissed. Her voice was calm, steady, and commanding. "I'd like to speak to the branch manager, Mr. Thomas Kent." Now. Ashley hesitated, taken aback by Natalie's unwavering presence. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Kent is extremely occupied. I'm certain he will wish to meet me," Natalie interrupted, setting her business card on the table. "Kindly deliver this to him immediately. I trust he understands how critical this is." Hesitantly, Ashley picked up the card and glanced over it. Her expression shifted from detached to stunned as she read aloud Natalie Coleman, Chief Executive Officer, Coleman Construction. Grew. Without meeting Natalie's eyes, Ashley quickly left toward the manager's office. Moments later, the door swung open and Thomas Kent appeared, his face a mixture of shock and concern. "Miss Coleman, I wasn't expecting," stammered eyes wide with recognition. "I imagine you'd prefer to hear this directly," Natalie responded, her tone sharp and commanding. With little choice, Kent guided her into his private office and shut the door. Natalie placed a stack of documents, contracts, confirmations, and credentials on his desk. Kent flipped through the pages, his complexion growing paler as he recognized who she was and her vital role in his bank's $2.3 billion agreement. "Miss Coleman, I don't know what to say," he whispered, his voice unsteady. Natalie locked eyes with him. "I'm not seeking an apology. I'm here to ensure you comprehend this clearly. What happened yesterday was intolerable.
Your bank
Degraded a significant partner, and unless you and your staff admit the wrongdoing, there will be serious repercussions." Kent collapsed into his chair, eyes fixed on the documents. In the thick silence that followed, Natalie understood her words had struck their mark as she turned to leave. Natalie paused at the door, looking back with unwavering certainty. Mr. Kent, I'm walking out today not as a belittled client, but as a partner granting your bank one final opportunity to rectify this. I trust you're wise enough to understand what that entails. With that, the door closed softly behind her. As she walked away, Natalie sensed she had regained more than her pride. She had forced those who belittled her to confront the prejudice they presumed was acceptable. She needed no further proof to know she would be back-ended next time. She wouldn't remain silent. The manager's office door clicked shut as Natalie walked away, her head high, though the dull ache of disappointment still simmered in her chest. But she knew to truly fix this, she needed to speak with someone. Hire someone who understood the contract's full significance and the devastating consequences if the partnership fell apart. One name immediately surfaced: Michael Andrews, Regional Vice President of Stratton Financial. That same afternoon, Natalie secured an urgent appointment with Mr. Andrews' office, emphasizing the matter's severity and its direct link to the $2.3 billion deal. Within 30 minutes, it was confirmed. Andrews' office sat on the top floor of the bank's headquarters. Its walls adorned with abstract art, expansive glass windows overlooking downtown Raleigh. Natalie entered with calm assurance, no dramatic gestures. Just her composed presence and polished attire drawing Andrews' immediate attention as he sat at the head of a large conference table. "Good afternoon, Miss Coleman. I hear you have an urgent matter," Andrews greeted politely, his voice tinged with curiosity and caution. Wasting no time, Natalie opened her leather briefcase, withdrew a dossier, and set it on the table. "Mr. Andrews, I believe you should review this contract again. It directly involves my company, Coleman Construction Group, the strategic partner in your bank's $2.3 billion project." Andrews' brow furrowed. His guarded expression shifted to intrigued as he examined the file, flipping through each page methodically. His eyes widened and his hand faintly trembled when he reached the signature page. Natalie Coleman, Chief Executive Officer, directly beneath his own name as the bank's representative. For a moment, silence suffocated the room. Andrews looked up, his face drained of color as the full impact of his staff's actions settled over him. "Miss Coleman, I can't believe this. Is this genuine?" he whispered, voice quivering. Natalie met his gaze, steady and unwavering. "Mr. Andrews, I never thought I'd stand here reaffirming what your bank should have recognized from the outset. Stratton Financial treated me as if I didn't belong, despite the fact that I signed a deal worth billions for you." Andrews leaned back, his eyes scanning the contract, searching for loopholes, finding none. He understood better than anyone the potential fallout, not just financial, but the permanent stain on Stratton Financial's reputation. I truly don't know how to justify my team's behavior," Andrews admitted, tension slicing through. His words, "Please believe me," had no idea this happened. Natalie's lips curved into a slight, knowing smile, her eyes sharp but not devoid of empathy. "Mr. Andrews, the problem isn't ignorance alone. It's the culture embedded in your bank, a culture where bias and prejudice quietly thrive." Andrews had no rebuttal. The silence in the glass-walled office magnified each tick of the clock, every sound a reminder of his institution's failure. At last, Natalie stood, smoothing her blazer with practiced calm. "I'm not here to threaten your bank. I'm giving you a chance to correct this before it's beyond repair. But know this, unless your institution fundamentally changes its mindset and practices, Stratton Financial will lose far more than a contract." For the first time since her arrival, Andrews looked at her with genuine respect. "Miss Coleman, I'll make sure this is resolved completely and immediately. You have my word." Natalie gave a single nod, turned gracefully, and exited, leaving Andrews alone to face the harsh truth his institution had long buried. As Natalie strode down the long hallway, she felt her strength and worth more vividly than ever. The fight wasn't over, but she would never again stay silent. And that was the first step toward lasting change. The moment Natalie shut Michael Andrews' office door behind her, a ripple of tension swept through every floor of Stratton Financial. Curious glances, whispered conversations filled the hallways. Normally quiet spaces buzzing with uncertainty. No one knew the full story, but the pale, hollow expression on Andrew's face as he emerged said everything. Less than an hour later, senior management initiated an immediate internal investigation. Every transaction, security camera feed, and recorded phone call was examined. Every staff member involved was summoned to explain themselves. Jessica, the once confident teller, who so brazenly insulted Natalie, now sat trembling before the bank's leadership. Her arrogance shattered, her excuses weak and contradictory. But once surveillance footage played, showing her contemptuously dropping Natalie's ID to the floor, all her defenses vanished. She was visibly shaken, unable to justify the undeniable evidence. Rachel, Jessica's close colleague, initially denied involvement. But when recordings of her hateful remarks played, her face drained of color. Words she had dismissed as harmless now stood as undeniable. Proof of deep-rooted bias exposed for all to see. But the most serious case was that of branch manager Thomas Kent. Seated tense and exhausted, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles whitened, he listened as testimony and video footage revealed his negligence, his failure to act while discrimination unfolded on his watch. Leadership asked the unavoidable question, as branch manager, how could you permit such blatant prejudice under your leadership? Kent's head lowered, cold sweat beading on his brow, fully aware his career teetered on the brink of destruction. Meanwhile, at the reception desk, Ashley endured her own reckoning. As the first to interact with Natalie Ann, the one who displayed the most open disdain, she had no defense once video and eyewitness accounts surfaced. Overwhelmed, she resigned within 2 days, vanishing quietly from the bank, Stratton Financials. Leadership acted swiftly and decisively. For the first time in its history, a special internal memo declared zero tolerance for any form of bias or prejudice, no matter how subtle. Every line of that message served as a stern warning to all. That evening, Michael Andrews convened an emergency all-staff meeting. Standing before a room heavy with tension, his voice grave and resolute, he declared, the events that transpired are completely unacceptable, and that the bank would under no circumstances allow anyone, whether deliberately or unintentionally, to insult a client, especially a vital business associate like Natalie Coleman. You've committed a serious error, Andrews stated firmly, his gaze sweeping across the space. From this point forward, I urge every one of you to engage in sincere self-reflection. Have you ever displayed similar behavior? So, correct it immediately before the consequences catch up to you. When the gathering concluded, the mood at Stratton Financial had permanently shifted. Employees exited with lowered eyes and heavy hearts, each one acutely aware that even small, careless actions could carry serious repercussions. As Michael Andrews strolled the now silent hallways, he understood that the organization had just undergone a painful lesson, but also a vital turning point to ensure such a grave misstep would never happen again. Right after the urgent meeting ended, the atmosphere inside Stratton Financial became almost suffocating with tension. Michael Andrews, the regional vice president, recognized that this situation was not simply the fault of a few individuals, it was the most obvious indicator, yet of a toxic workplace culture that had been left unaddressed for far too long. Alone in his office, Michael sat quietly, reviewing the newly finalized internal assessments. The recorded cases of racial prejudice, customer disrespect, and discriminatory mindsets weren't isolated incidents, but clear signs of a system lacking proper oversight. He understood perfectly well that without wide-ranging reforms, the bank would face even worse consequences in the future. Within mere days, a formal directive was sent to all branches. Stratton Financial would no longer permit any kind of bias or discrimination, and far stricter accountability processes would be implemented immediately. The first measure was to suspend in some cases, dismiss the employees directly involved or complicit in the recent incident. Jessica, whose behavior had been plainly captured on security cameras, was fired immediately. She exited the bank silently, her previous arrogance replaced with humiliation and regret. Rachel, who had encouraged Jessica with her own offensive, Comments was placed on an indefinite suspension in order to undergo extensive diversity and anti-racism instruction. She sat inside a closed conference room, stunned as leadership delivered stern warnings, realizing for the first time that her casual ridicule of another's suffering wasn't a minor lapse in judgment, but a serious violation. Perhaps the most severe consequence fell upon Thomas Kent, the branch manager. After a tense review by senior leadership, he was demoted and reassigned to an administrative role. Stripped of the authority he once proudly held, he sat in his cramped, new workspace, staring at his trembling hands, fully aware that his career had been derailed by his own inaction and complacency. Meanwhile, Ashley, the receptionist who had displayed the most blatant disdain toward Natalie, resigned under the immense weight of internal backlash. Her abrupt exit served as a clear warning to all staff. No one would be permitted to ignore or enable discrimination, even in its most subtle forms. Once personnel actions were finalized, Stratton Financial launched compulsory diversity and anti-bias training throughout the entire company. From workshops and seminars to urgent roundtable talks, every employee from top executives to recent hires was required to participate. Industry-leading experts were brought in to educate staff on recognizing hidden prejudice, practicing respectful communication, and understanding the critical importance of fairness in every client interaction. Simultaneously, the bank overhauled its internal monitoring systems. A new compliance department was created, reporting directly to executive leadership, charged with tracking customer treatment and flagging any questionable conduct or discriminatory behavior for immediate action. Michael Andrews personally supervised these initiatives, reminding staff in every meeting that organizational culture doesn't transform overnight, but by beginning now. They could guarantee this painful failure would never recur. Within a single week, Stratton Financial's public image had been dramatically altered. Forced smiles and diverted gazes were replaced with a professional focus and increased awareness. Employees started engaging with clients more genuinely, as though every interaction was being closely observed by the institution itself. Back inside his office, Michael reviewed the restructuring reports with cautious relief. Yet he knew this was merely the beginning. These bold, corrective actions had established the foundation, but restoring credibility and trust would demand long-term commitment. Most importantly, the bank needed to foster an environment where every customer, regardless of appearance, background, or attire, felt authentically respected. Later that day, as he exited the office, walking along the brightly lit hallways, Michael experienced an unfamiliar, but welcome, calm blended with cautious optimism. Optimism that Stratton Financial's hardest lesson would ultimately push it toward a fairer, stronger future. Unfairness. Yet now, as I stand before you all, I realize that the most powerful response to prejudice and injustice isn't retaliation. It's each one of us rising through success, armed with bravery and unwavering belief. Her voice carried across the room. While speaking, Natalie noticed a familiar face quietly lingering at the rear. Thomas Kent. Clutched in his hand was a slim folder from the local business initiative, and his eyes remained locked on Natalie, filled with appreciation and regret. He offered a subtle nod, an unspoken gesture of gratitude for the transformation she had ignited, not only in the community, but within him as well. The event concluded, yet its influence only expanded. Natalie strolled unhurriedly along the crowded hallway, her heart overflowing with happiness and firm certainty that she was following the correct course. She had not merely mended her personal wounds, but had become a source of healing for countless others. That evening, as the city's glow softened, Natalie sat silently by her window, her gaze fixed upon the cityscape. She understood this story was no longer hers alone. It had become the flame that illuminated hope for countless young individuals from disadvantaged communities, offering them a voice and a rightful place in the world. And in recognizing that, she discovered the greatest triumph she could ever desire. Natalie's steady, quiet actions slowly produced an influence that stretched far beyond what she had initially imagined. Not only did youths from underrepresented backgrounds take notice, But even the very organizations once positioned as obstacles in her journey started acknowledging the profound, constructive transformation she was bringing about. One morning, seated in the humble office of Empower the Future, Natalie received an official-looking envelope from the Raleigh Business Association. She was surprised to spot Stratton Financial's recognizable emblem on the letterhead. After a brief moment of uncertainty, she tore open the envelope and swiftly read through the message. It was an invitation requesting Natalie to be the keynote speaker at the city's yearly gathering of entrepreneurs and business influencers. At the bottom of the invitation was Michael Andrews' signature, the same. Michael Andrews, who had witnessed and addressed the discriminatory incident at the bank. What astonished Natalie wasn't the privilege of the invitation itself, but the significant change in perspective from the very institution that had previously harmed her. Although hesitant at first, Natalie chose to accept. She recognized that this was far more than simply delivering a speech. It was a vital chance to amplify her message of equality, belief, and mutual dignity. When the day of the event arrived, the grand ballroom of the Raleigh Center Hotel overflowed with entrepreneurs and prominent leaders from businesses of every size. The soft sparkle of crystal chandeliers reflected off polished suits and elegant dresses, crafting an atmosphere of sophistication and underlying tension. Amidst the crowd, Natalie easily spotted Michael Andrews seated in the front row, his gaze filled with admiration and quiet anticipation. Beside him were Thomas, Kent, and Jessica, their expressions blending nervousness, embarrassment, and reflection. As they remembered the events of the past, the host approached the podium and announced formally, "Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Miss Natalie Coleman, CEO of Coleman Construction Group and the visionary behind the Empower the Future initiative." The audience burst into enthusiastic applause as Natalie ascended the stage, her face calm and self-assured. For a fleeting moment, her eyes swept over those who had once diminished her. Yet there was not a trace of resentment in her expression. She knew she hadn't come to reopen old wounds, but to help guide them all toward a brighter, renewed future. Adjusting the microphone, Natalie paused briefly, allowing silence to settle over the room before she spoke, her voice clear and steady. "Today I won't speak about myself, nor recount past experiences. Instead, I ask each of you to reflect on one simple question, a question with the potential to reshape how we engage with one another." Every gaze in the room turned toward her, waiting. She smiled softly, then posed her question with intention and strength. How different would our world be if we chose to trust each other from the very first moment we learned who someone truly is? A peculiar stillness enveloped the room. Such a simple question, yet profoundly deep, reaching into the heart of every listener. Michael Andrews lowered his head, his eyes shadowed with contemplation. Remembering the grave error of not trusting Natalie when they first met, Thomas Kent remained frozen, his fists clenched, painfully aware of the price of his former doubt and scorn. Toward the rear, Jessica discreetly wiped away tears, understanding that had she believed in Natalie then, she might never have lost her job and her dignity so bitterly. Others in the crowd felt a sharp pang of conscience, quietly wondering if they too had once acted the same way. Natalie remained silent, merely standing there, allowing the enormity of her question to sink into every heart present. After a minute's pause, the first gentle applause broke the quiet, gradually swelling into thunderous support, filling the ballroom with undeniable endorsement of her words. As she exited the stage, Michael Andrews rose and made his way to her, his eyes reflecting more sincerity than Natalie had ever seen from him before. "Thank you, Natalie. Your words help me understand not only you, but also myself and the institution I represent." Natalie nodded graciously, her gaze gentle, yet firm. "We all possess the ability to change, Mr. Andrews. The true question is whether we have the bravery to start by believing in each other's worth and integrity." Andrews said nothing, only nodded deeply, fully aware that this moment carried the most significant lesson of his professional life. Natalie walked along the expansive corridor, feeling more content than she ever had before. That day, Raleigh's business community witnessed not merely the excellence of a determined female CEO, but something greater. They began to inspect their own morals and fundamentally rethink how they regarded and interacted with others. Natalie, once a victim of injustice, had risen to a level of admiration, not through retaliation, through a single potent question capable of reshaping her entire world. Stepping out of the grand hall, Natalie realized her story was no longer confined to her alone. Though she had always declined interviews and avoided media attention, the movement she had sparked reverberated louder than any headline ever could. In the days that followed the event, Natalie's modest Empower the Future office overflowed with messages and emails. They arrived not just from aspiring entrepreneurs and minority communities, but also from individuals who had previously stood against those whose past behavior and beliefs had caused her harm. One early morning, as Natalie scrolled through her inbox, her attention paused on an email titled, "A Sincere Apology from Thomas Kent." The message was thoughtful and heartfelt, offering no justifications or excuses. "Dear Miss Coleman, I don't expect your forgiveness, but it's important that you know I fully acknowledge my wrongdoing. My actions and ignorance then caused you significant hurt. I vow to dedicate my life to confronting the hidden prejudices that once clouded my judgment and that of so many others. Thank you for enlightening me." Days later, another neatly handwritten letter arrived at her office. This one from Ashley, the receptionist, who had once greeted Natalie with frosty disregard. Her note was brief, yet heavy with regret. "Dear Miss Coleman, I've endlessly reflected on how I treated you. There's no excuse for my apathy. Please know that I've begun a new chapter, reminding myself daily to greet everyone with compassion and dignity. I will never forget the invaluable lesson you unknowingly taught me about kindness and faith." Reading those words, Natalie allowed herself a quiet, satisfied smile. She had never sought revenge or even an apology from those who had hurt her, but witnessing true change in those who once wronged her brought her warmth and peace beyond words. Around the same period, she learned that Stratton Financial, guided directly by Michael Andrews, had introduced sweeping internal reforms. The bank had made diversity training and anti-racism education compulsory for every staff member. Beyond Stratton, many of Raleigh's other major banks and corporations reached out to Natalie, eager to implement their own Empower the Future programs. In no time, even without mainstream publicity, Natalie's story quietly but powerfully spread. It became a shining example, inspiring deep, honest discussions across the community. Companies and organizations began examining themselves, acknowledging hidden prejudices within their systems, issues that had long gone overlooked, whether by neglect or design. Several weeks later, on a peaceful weekend afternoon, Natalie sat alone in her simple office. She reflected that the very pain she once endured had fueled the momentum for real, lasting change. She no longer carried sorrow or anger, only immense peace and quiet pride. She picked up yet another letter, this time from a young employee at Stratton Financial, whom she had never met. "Dear Miss Coleman, though we've never met, I feel compelled to tell you how your story and your actions have reshaped our workplace. We now serve every client with genuine respect, leaving no room for the discrimination we once tolerated. My colleagues and I are truly grateful to you for paving the way toward this transformation." Natalie folded the letter gently and stared out the window, serenity washing over her. She understood her journey had moved beyond her own story, had become a catalyst, awakening people to reevaluate themselves and their society. She knew the path had been difficult, but she also recognized she had never walked it alone. All around her stood thousands of young dreamers, entrepreneurs, employees from businesses large and small, striving for a world without prejudice or inequality. To Natalie, that was the most meaningful achievement of all. And as the quiet afternoon sun filtered through her window, she realized that the question she once voiced at the conference was no longer merely a speech, it was a conviction embedded within her, out, and within countless others. How would our world transforms if we chose to trust who someone is, right from the first moment they introduce themselves? She knew that question would continue to resonate, prompting reflection, inspiring change, and quietly fueling a profound turning point in the battle against discrimination and social injustice that she had so passionately championed.